Okay, welcome to this. I think it is our sixth. Must be the sixth. No, seventh. I don't remember anymore. Anyway, we are working our way through chapter 6 of Master Shantideva. Let's go ahead and start, as we usually do, with a few prayers. We're going to begin with the homage to Shakyamuni Buddha. Again, normally we do this 3 times, but I think tonight we'll just do this once. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Then let's do the mandala offering. Again, we'll just do this in English. Again, and keep in mind that whoops, sorry, went too far. That third line, put an I in front of that. Anyway, we'll again try to visualize a vast pure offering that you're making to all the holy beings so you can receive their inspiration and blessings to become just like them. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then we go on to do refuge and bodhicitta as we normally do, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gipe sunam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chunyan Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. Okay, then as usual, let's go ahead and do a short meditation, give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a little bit, and then on the basis of that, we'll generate our motivation together of bodhicitta. So just find a good meditation posture, one that works for you, and do a meditation on the breath for the next few minutes. If you need a suggestion, again, I usually suggest people working with the sensation around the area of the nostrils where you feel the air coming in and out. And if you can just keep your awareness there as best as you can, that's great. But no doubt the mind will wander. And when we see that the mind has gotten distracted, then at that time, when we see that that's occurred, we let go of whatever distracted us and bring the mind back to the breath. So I will ring the chime on this end to begin the meditation period. And after a few minutes in silence, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set motivation of bodhicitta. So now let's set our motivation together. I thought it might be useful to reflect on the verses that we looked at in terms of the nature of beings. And this we can funnel into our motivation of bodhicitta. Master Shantideva asked us first, is it the nature of sentient beings to harm others? In other words, is that sort of naturally what they do? And we can say to some degree, because sentient beings are under the control of their own delusions and their own karma. Temporally, it is in the nature of beings to harm others. Why do we expect others to have greater control over their minds when most beings don't even know how to work with their minds? They've never begun that process that we're engaging in this class. So in this way, we can say they are under the control of the afflictions. So at least from that vantage point, it is in their nature to do things that are harmful, to even harm us as well as others. Master Shantideva says this would be like begrudging fire because it burns. If it's in the nature of fire to burn, we wouldn't get upset when fire does that. In the same way, if it's in the nature of beings to harm, why would we get upset, or why would we close our hearts to them? But then he goes on to look at the other side of it. What if that harming of others is only incidental? It's only there due to various causes and conditions, and it's not really the nature of beings to harm others. And of course, in Buddhist terms, this is the deeper truth, the reality of Buddha nature, the fact that all sentient beings are simply dealing with the afflictions that are adventitious. They're not in the nature of the mind. They're not inherent to the mind. They arise on the basis of their causes and conditions. And if we get rid of those causes and conditions, we no longer will be under the control of them. Master Shantideva says if this is the case, which again it is in a deeper way, the case for all beings, that they're simply under the control of these afflictions because they're there adventitiously, they haven't been removed. Well, then that would be like begrudging space for allowing smoke to arise in it. Smoke is only there due to causes and conditions. The space is not at fault. In the same way, the clear minds of beings are not at fault. Who those beings are in their deepest sense, the fault does not lie there. The fault lies with the afflictions that are arising within the minds of beings. So while this instruction was meant to help us to overcome our own anger towards others, we can also use it to increase our compassion for them. Because we see that in the first case, yes, sentient beings are under the control of their delusions right now. And this is why they harm others. This is why they upset us. This is why they continue to do actions that cause their own suffering as well as the suffering of others. But at a deeper level, sentient beings are free of all of these adventitious stains. All the delusions are simply there because beings have not yet learned how to overcome them. So when we sit down, as we've been doing these Monday evenings, to study this text, we do it with the motivation of helping others to overcome their anger as well as all the afflictions, to be able to completely clarify what is clouding their minds right now so that they can attain that purified state, the state of Buddhahood. And we recognize that how we can be most effective at doing that for others is by accomplishing Buddhahood ourselves. So as we spend another evening examining this topic of patience and how we overcome our own patterns of anger, do it with the motivation of bodhicitta that aspires to become fully enlightened, so we then can skillfully and perfectly help all beings to do this same work. Okay, so again, welcome. I'm pretty sure it's the sixth class. I'll have the slides up in just a moment that'll show that. But anyway, let's go into the slides and get moving forward so we can make it through a good number of verses tonight. So we are, yes, in the sixth class. We left off at verse 56. We finished up through 55 last week. Let's look at the outlines where we're at. I didn't go all the way back to the very beginning tonight. Just looking at this main outline, which is called Stopping Anger for Undesired Actions. And this is where we had this whole section, Stopping Anger at that which faults the self being, ourselves and what we have to experience in terms of harm. Then we're going to look at that which faults friends, and then anger at those who benefit one's enemies, who help out the people that one doesn't like. So this is a major chunk of this chapter. We saw that, of course, the first part of it was tolerating the generation of suffering, which were the three types of patience that we need to cultivate in regard to our own experiences. I'm not going to review those tonight. Some of them are going to come up again in some of the verses that we're going to cover. But now we're on to another section that could essentially be seen as an extension of that third type of patience, where we are patient with others who cause harm to us. But here we're looking at this kind of uniquely because mostly in that section we looked at physical harm to ourselves. Now we're looking at verbal harm and things that happen to us, people say about us, the contempt they have for us, the slander they might say about us, and so on. And so last week we began that whole section. There are 4 sections within this. We went through the first parts of this last week, saying that essentially it doesn't harm our minds, so why should we get upset when something happens? We already looked at, of course, why we shouldn't get upset if it harms our bodies, but in the case of our minds, that's a choice as to whether we get harmed by the contempt or slander of others. And then, of course, we looked at verse 54, how it's unsuitable to get angry at somebody because all of their contempt that they're dishing out towards us doesn't devour us in any way. It doesn't do anything that's of great import. So we can make a choice, not to pay that much attention to it, not to take heed of it. So then we went into the third section that is kind of highlighted on the screen there, which is called "It's unsuitable to be angry at obstacles to things like gain." So we might start thinking, well, maybe we have to get angry at those who thwart us in attaining the things we need or that we want, even things that we might be able to use to benefit others, the gain that we have, the praise that we might be able to receive, a reputation that we have that might be good for us to possess, and so on. So the very first outline within this was stopping gain disintegrates, or I'm sorry, since gain disintegrates quickly, anger at obstacles to gain is unsuitable. This is on page 22 of Gyaltsep Je's commentary. So let's just review verse 55 that I went through at the tail end of last week's class, which begins this whole section of it being unsuitable to be angry at obstacles to things like gain. Because it will hinder my gain, I do not want this. I shall discard my gains here, and my negativities will remain securely. So again, according to Gyaltsep Je, the arguments being put forward in the first 2 lines, someone might say, well, it's going to hinder my gain. Therefore, I don't want to be slandered. I don't want people to intervene and thwart me in obtaining what it is that I need. And the answer, of course, it's given is the gain for which one meditates on anger will be destroyed quickly in this life, and the negativity of anger will remain firmly in my continuum. It's easier to not achieve gain, and it is unsuitable to get angry. So again, we would be better off, in terms of what we are going to give up for the sake of maintaining our virtue, our practice of patience. It'd be better to give up the gain that we're going to get in this life, because that's all going to have to be discarded at the end of this life anyway. And when we die, gain doesn't do any good for us. It has to all be left behind. And we're going to continue with this idea in the verses to come. But the idea is, why don't let go of your practice of this very precious patience that will help you to have the merit and the good kind of energy to go forward and to progress on the Bodhisattva path and so on. If we give it up for the sake of gain that is just temporal, that all has to be left behind, well, we're not making the right choice. We're not choosing the right one, selecting the right thing to put our money on. So let's go ahead and look at the next section. This is, again, we didn't cover this last week. We'll continue for new material from here on. Stopping wrongful gain is the section, the outline. Verse 56 says, "Thus it is better that I die today than live a long time through wrong livelihood. Even if I should live a long time, there will be the very suffering of death." So for this, Gyaltsab says, even if I die today without any gain, that is easier. But it is unsuitable to live long with the wrong livelihood that is gained through anger. So if we, use our anger and our getting upset at others as a means to make sure we get what we want, all the gain that we need to have in this life, material, wealth, and so on, well, then we've sacrificed our practice of morality again and our maintaining our patience for the sake of getting all of that. It's, much better to live a long life and not have that gain than to live a long life or whatever duration of life and create non-virtue, create more anger. So he says, even if someone like me abides for a long time, in the end, I have to give up everything. And I am not beyond the very sufferings of death. Every one of us is subject to death. Death is going to come inevitably for each of us. And when we get to death, what will be the measure of what comes after and the value of this life, in a sense, isn't what gain we've had, again, because that can't be taken with us. And if we've acquired that gain through anger and through unskillful means, well, then obviously we've, again, done ourselves a disservice. We haven't really used this life well. That anger was not fruitful. So then we continue again in the same vein, establishing by example that craving for gain is unsuitable. So here we're given an example that will give us an idea of why it's not proper for us to do this. And the example has to do with a dream. And this is two verses, 57 and 58. Suppose someone should awaken from a dream in which they experienced 100 years of happiness. And suppose another should awaken from a dream in which they experienced just a short while of happiness. For both of these people who have awakened, that happiness will never return. Similarly, whether my life has been long or short, at the time of death, it will be finished like that. So, we often talk about how this life is like a dream, not just when we sing, row, row, row your boat, but, the Buddha used this idea of the dreamlike nature of our existence, that, we are propelled into this life through the force of our karma. All of this transpires, but then, of course, we get propelled from at the end of this life into another existence. Everything of this life gets left behind, except what imprints we put on our minds. So here, once more, if we invest in all of this gain and we have all these beautiful pleasures and wonderful things in our lives, we live the high life. Well, at the end of this life, it's not going to matter too much. It's as if you had a very long dream with lots of joyful, wonderful, delicious things in it, but that dream is over. That existence comes to an end. And of course, if you acquired all of that and all you did was create more non-virtue by engaging in all of those pleasures that you obtained through these unskillful means, through generating anger and so on, well, again, it wouldn't have amounted to much. So here, Gyaltsab on the top of page 23 says, regardless of whether one is someone who wakes up from 100 years dream in which one experienced happiness, or whether one is someone who wakes up after only a brief moment of happiness in a dream. For either, when awake, this happiness will not return. At the end of it, it doesn't matter how long the dream lasted because it didn't amount to anything. Neither one of them has any greater substance when one is awake. Similarly, whether one has had a long happy life or a short happy life, at the time of death, it becomes only a mere memory, and therefore it is unsuitable to crave for gain. So again, this is just pointing out the futility of all of that. If we just simply engage in all of these things with this human life, and especially if we cultivate non-virtue through the mind of anger to obtain the things that we want, we will once more have done ourselves an incredible disservice, because all of that is over at the end of our life, just like a dream is over, regardless of how long our lives were. The fourth outline in this is the reason why craving for gain is unsuitable. Again, these all start sounding like the same in terms of the topic headings. Verse 59 here says, although I may acquire abundant gain and enjoy happiness for a long time, I shall go forth naked and empty-handed, just like having been robbed. So again, at the end of this life, you more or less go forward naked. I mean, you don't take your body with you, so it's not naked in that way. It's your consciousness that goes forward from this life with everything that you acquired in this life, even the health of this body, the looks of this body, and so on, all of that left behind. You have to go forth empty-handed in a sense. Now, again, it doesn't mean you don't take anything with you, but in terms of gain, you don't take a thing with you. And that's what the point is being made here. So it says, Gyaltsab J, page 23, though I may attain much gain and live happily for a long time, at the time of death, like having been robbed by a thief, I will have to go naked, without clothing, and empty-handed, without wealth. So again, just pointing out that death just abolishes, gets rid of everything that we possessed in this life that is material. All of our wealth, your bank account, everything, it's all left behind. You can't take a single penny with you. So then finally, the fifth outline, refuting that it is suitable to establish gain. So someone might put forth the opinion, if I were to live due to gain, in other words, if this gain were allow me to have a nice long life and a very healthy life and have all my things taken care of, then I shall exhaust negativities and increase merit. In other words, I'll use this life virtuously. I'll use this life well. Well, the response is, if you were to get angry on account of gain, will not your merit be consumed and negativities created? So in other words, the whole point of this was not whether you have a nice long life and are able to do lots of virtuous things with it. The point is, how did you get the gain that allowed you to have that long life? If you got it through getting angry and upset at those who slander you or do something that gets in the way of your well-being, well then all your merit will be consumed and you'll create more negativities. And then verse 61 is also in this section. If my very life were to degenerate for the sake of that, then what will be the use of the life of one who commits only negativities? So again, what purpose will our life serve? If we degenerate our life to bring our life to creating no real meaning or purpose for the sake of the gain that we've gotten, through those means, then what will be the use of that life that we've only committed negativities with? We haven't really done anything purposeful with it. Again, there's nothing wrong with wanting material possessions in one's life and wanting to have a nice long life. Those are good things to pray for and to create the causes for. But what do we do with, or how do we get those? How do we acquire those? And the whole point that's being made here is that you can't use anger and the actions that follow from anger as a means to acquire all of that. If others are being an obstacle to you acquiring those things, you're not justified, even if you think you're going to use this life purposefully and meaningfully, because you've defeated your purpose and meaning by doing that. It's, kind of a bit obvious, but nonetheless a very poignant way of putting it. So he says here, the argument, Gyaltsab J says, if I live for a long time due to gain, then in order to purify negativity with the four powers and increase, I think, increase negativity, I don't think that's the right translation there. It means increase merit and so on. I shall achieve gain. So this is an incorrect word, I believe, in Venerable Fetter's translation there. So the idea again is the argument could put forward and say, if I end up living a nice long life due to this gain that I acquired through anger, and I can purify a lot of negativities and acquire a lot of merit, well then I will have made this life meaningful. Well, of course, it's a fake argument. The answer that's given is, if one gets angry for the purpose of gain, it will exhaust the merits accumulated over 1,000 eons. Again, if we use anger, going back to the very beginning of the text, right, we saw that anger consumes, it burns up all of our merit, our store of merit. So we're already kind of going way back in terms of the merit we have by creating that anger. Then we have to use this life to create the merit to restore the anger that we destroyed. It seems kind of silly. Why not just forget about gain, in terms of getting angry to obtain that, and just try to do what you can in honest, patient ways, ways where we're upholding good values and so on, and then use this life meaningfully from there. So it says, does one then not achieve negativity? If so, then what purpose did one's life serve, since it only becomes the condition for one's degeneration? The life where one only creates negativity, what shall one do with it, as it is useless? It's not meaningful to make this life consumed in any way with negativity. again, recall that one of the most fundamental teachings the Buddha gave, that's in that nice little verse that is sometimes recited before teachings, is do not commit any negative actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Well, the very first stage of the path in terms of the Lam Rim is about abandoning negativities. We have to stop creating negativities, and the mind of anger is one of the main mental pathways that causes us to engage in non-virtuous behavior. So again, not going to be useful if we spend this whole life creating negativity for the sake of gain that will give us a nice long life to do something virtuous with. It just doesn't make sense. It's not using logic. So now we get into the fourth section of this whole section of being patient with contempt, slander, and so on. And this is, it is unsuitable to be angry if others lack faith or confidence in us. This might be something else that somebody puts forward. Especially we as Dharma practitioners, we want people to have kind of a faith and confidence in us so that we can benefit them. Well, if somebody's getting in the way to that, becoming an obstacle to others having faith and confidence in us, we might think we're justified in getting angry at them. But once more, this is not wise, as Shantideva is going to point out. There are two sections within this. They have very, very long titles. You'll see these at the bottom of page 23. If it is suitable to get angry when there is a loss of faith due to unpleasant words to oneself, then it is also suitable to be angry if there is a loss of faith due to unpleasant words to others. And that's basically saying what the entire verse says, verse 62. Since sentient beings will be weakened or degenerate, I shall be angry with those who say unpleasant things. Why are you not likewise angry with those who say unpleasant things to other people? So again, somebody's putting forward an argument that sentient beings' confidence in me will degenerate, will be weakened. And so I can get angry then at those who say unpleasant things that cause that. And of course, the response is, well, then why aren't you equally angry with those who say unpleasant things to other people? Because the same thing could happen to them, right? Anybody who has words said about them that are negative, other people can lose their confidence and faith in them as a good person, a reliable person, a trustworthy person. So we're not using the same criteria then. We're looking at it only when it affects us. Yeah. If it damages my reputation and what people think of me and the confidence they have in me, well, then I'm justified. But when somebody else has that happen to them, do I get upset? Do I take, issue with that? No, because it doesn't really matter so much to me what happens to their reputation and what people think of them. So here the argument is put forward at the top of page 24 by Gyaltsab, though it is unsuitable to become angry at the obstacles to gain, I shall be angry at those who speak unpleasantly to me as it degenerates the faith of my faithful. Again, especially if we begin to acquire what they call a retinue. All bodhisattvas are intent upon developing a retinue, those who they see as sort of their disciples or people that they want to benefit, that they feel some closeness with. If people are saying things that harm that relationship, that make you look bad in the face of those people, you might think that you're completely justified in getting angry and upset at them. The answer from Shantideva, according to Gyaltsab's commentary, is if you are angry because of a degeneration of merit, then why do you not get angry when unpleasant words are said to another person? If their faith is going to degenerate on the basis of those people as well, why aren't you equally upset? Here also the virtue of faith for others is degenerated. It's inconsistent. A lot of what we're going to get into tonight are, Master Shantideva pointing out how we're being inconsistent or illogical. We're not really thinking it all through. Why? Because we're falling back to the place of self-concern. Once more, we haven't gotten to the chapter 9 where we look at self-grasping and the whole root of ignorance that's behind all of this. But this is like that pattern that keeps playing out in all the delusions, is that we get so concerned about ourselves and do everything from the vantage point of needing to attend to ourselves. And we sometimes can even try to put a virtuous spin on it, is what's happening in this section, right? Saying, well, but if others get in the way of me having gain so that I can then use this life virtuously, well, then I'm justified in getting angry at them. Or if others start to cause people to lose their confidence in me because I want to benefit them, well, then I'm justified in getting angry at them. But it's not consistent. What we want to be is a patient person with everything that we meet. We don't want to become impatient with some, thinking that we can justify it because of what we are trying to achieve. It flies in the face of the Bodhisattva ethic, the Bodhisattva morality. And once more, that's because we keep falling back to that place of self-concern, that place of needing to attend to ourselves, but not necessarily applying the same logic with regard to others. Now we have that second outline of this section, which is also quite long. It says, if one can be patient with a lack of faith for others, then it is also suitable to be patient with a lack of faith in oneself due to the condition of afflictions. So here we're just kind of throwing that back then and saying, well, then you need to be equally patient, because we are quite often patient when other people are being scorned, or things are happening to them that cause others to lose faith in them. Well, we have to be equally patient when it's us, that are the objects of those comments. So it says, if you are patient with this lack of faith because it is related to others' non-faith, then why are you not patient with unpleasant words, since they are related to the arisal of afflictions? So again, in the first two lines is the idea that when others are criticized and slandered and so on, and it can cause their friends and their colleagues to lose faith in them due to that person doing that, well, we're patient with that. We don't really take any objection to that. But then why aren't we patient with the unpleasant words that others throw at us? Because they're also arising due to the afflictions, just like the criticism that's happening to others that causes their colleagues to lose faith in them. It's the same with regard to the people who are throwing unpleasant words at us. As we saw earlier, everything is arising from various causes and conditions. So here, let me read from what's on the screen here first, because I found in this one book that I have that's a commentary, I think from the Nyingma tradition by Kunzang Pelden. I like the way he explained this. He says, perhaps we will claim that we are not upset when unpleasant words are addressed to others, because those who say such things do so because they have lost faith owing to the apparent misbehavior of the people in question, who may actually even be sublime beings. So here he's using the example of maybe they're saying things that are negative and putting that person down because they've lost faith in that person. They have they have a negative mind towards them because of the things that they've seen them do, even though they might actually be very good people. But if this is the case, why is it that we are impatient when they insult us? For when such people say unpleasant things to us, it is dependent on the arising of negative emotions, and they have no control over it, which is also what they're doing with those other people, right? Everyone who says something negative about somebody, invariably they're doing it because they're under the control of their afflictions. Therefore, we ought to bear with it. In short, when others dislike us, when they create obstacles to our success, when they insult us to our face or slander us behind our backs, we should take pleasure in cultivating patience. So let's look at what Gyaltsab says on this, in the middle of page 24. He says, in the case where you can be patient without anger with the loss of faith in another due to unpleasant words to them, because the object depends on another person, because it's their stuff, we don't really take issue when it's someone else. Again, we don't have that identification with that person. But when it's directed at us, it's very different. He says, then why, mind, are you not patient with the unpleasant words that are said to you? It follows that you should be, because they depend on the generation of the other's afflictions. We could add there as well. The only reason why people are saying things that slander others or that cause others, some misery, is because they're motivated by the afflictions. So again, it's just using this idea of we're not applying things consistently. We're not patient. We're patient with one, but we're not patient with the other. So again, we have to apply both cases because we have to apply it to both cases because both of them arise from the afflictions. So patience is called for with regard to both. So that concludes this whole section that is, again, stopping faults towards oneself. So this is, the lion's share of this chapter in terms of what we've looked at. It was all the way up through verse 63, stopping anger at that which faults oneself, which is directed towards oneself. It's not like we're going to completely let go of any harm to oneself. Now we're going to go on to look at the next of these three main things, stopping anger at that which faults or causes harm to friends. And then we're going to go on to the third one, stopping being angry at those benefiting one's enemies. By the way, this categorization, I couldn't find the exact passage in, I don't know if it's in Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise, but some Lamrim texts do set out the 9 bases for provoking anger in regard to these three groupings. Yourself as the first 3, those who harmed you, yourself in the past, are harming you in the present and will harm you in the future, or are probable to harm you in the future. The second one has to do with your friends. Those who harmed your friends in the past are harming them in the present or will harm them in the future, have that potential to do that harm to them. And then the 7th through the 9th are those who helped your enemies in the past, are helping them in the present and will help them in the future. So again, these 9 bases are the individuals, the beings who provoke our anger, whether it's directed at us, our friends, or whether it's those people helping our enemies, helping those that we dislike. And of course, when we get to that section, which I'm hoping we'll get to tonight, we see that that's perhaps one of the most challenging, because we like our enemies to be harmed and not helped. This is an unfortunate thing, but because of what they've done to us and others, or the ways that they've harmed us, we don't want them to be helped. We don't want any benefit to them. So in regard to stopping anger at that which harms our friends, faults our friends, we have 2 sections. The first one, stopping it with the patience of definitely relying on the Dharma. Remember I said that those 3 types of patience would recur. The patience of definitely relying on the Dharma was the second one we looked at in regard to the harm to oneself. We're going to look at that next. And then we go on to stopping it with the patience that does not think anything of harm, which was the third one we used in regard to ourself. And there is one text, I think, that actually says that some of this could even be related to stopping suffering in general. But anyway, or being patient with regard to suffering in general, which was the first. So now we go into this first one, stopping it with the patience of definitely relying on the Dharma. This has 2 sub outlines. Why it is unsuitable if holy bodies, etc., are harmed. And then secondly, it is likewise suitable to be patient with harm to persons such as friends. So I forgot to highlight the first one there, but we're going to go to that one, verse 64. Oh, there it is. Verse 64, should others talk frivolously about or even destroy holy images, reliquaries like stupas and so on, and the sacred Dharma, the texts and so on, my hatred is inappropriate, for the Buddhas and so forth can never be harmed. So it's kind of interesting. This is under the headline of, the patience of definitely relying on the Dharma, but we don't really get to that till the next verse. Here the idea is that we have those things that we feel close to, some affinity towards. In this case, the 3 jewels that are represented by holy images, stupas, by the texts themselves and so on. And so somebody might actually think, well, I have complete justification again to get angry when those objects that I feel some closeness to, some affinity for, just like I do to my friends and spiritual teachers and other people, when those objects are harmed. But of course, this one doesn't make sense. Why? Because as Master Shantideva pointed out, you can't harm them. Even if you were to, like what China did in occupying Tibet and destroying all of the monasteries and holy objects and burning, the texts and all these various things. Those are just objects in the end. They can't be harmed. You haven't killed a Buddha by virtue of burning a tanka or destroying a statue. So on page 25, Gyaltsab says, the arguments put forward, though it is unsuitable to be angry when oneself is harmed, it is suitable to be angry when the triple gem is harmed, when the Buddha, that's represented by the statues, the Dharma, that's represented by the texts, and the Sangha, that's represented, actually the Sangha would be represented by the statues, I'm sorry. The Buddha would be represented by the stupas. They generally say these are the 3 we normally have those on our altar, right? You have the Buddha in the center, and then you have the stupa on the right as you're looking at it, the Buddha's left, and then you would have the text on the Buddha's right, your left. And so again, these represent the 3 Sangha, the 3 triple gem. The Sangha would be represented by the Buddha statue, the Buddha would be represented by the stupa, and then the text represents the Dharma. So it says here, if the answer is given, if the bodies of the Buddhas and the stupas of great enlightenment and so forth, and the holy Dharma are the object of idle talk or criticism, and even if the bodies are destroyed, even if someone goes to those lengths, again, that would happen in when China was occupying Tibet, and even it is unsuitable to be angry, even if all that happens. Gyaltsab Je goes on to say, the Buddhas and so forth, the triple gem, do not possess harm, and the attacker is the object of compassion, and it is suitable to be affectionate toward them. Of course, this is what a Buddha would do, right? If a Buddha is harmed by a being, they don't retaliate and get angry. They have even greater compassion for them. That shows the extent of the development of their minds. So in the same way, if these objects that represent the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha are harmed, the compassion of these beings would only become richer because they see the harm that those beings are inflicting on these objects and have even greater compassion for them. The meaning, Gyaltsab Je says, is that the triple gem does not generate mental unhappiness due to mental pain. You know, way back we saw that verse that how anger starts is on the basis of our own mental unhappiness, right? Something comes into our sphere of experience that causes us an unpleasant feeling, whether it be the words that somebody says or the stick that somebody beats us over the head with, or whatever the case might be. And of course, that unpleasant feeling induces a mental unhappiness that is the fuel for our anger, and everything arises from that. Well, Buddhas, Dharma, and Sangha, they don't have that happening, especially, again, the Buddha, doesn't have any mental unhappiness being generated on the basis of what they experience. They're totally at ease, totally at peace. So there's whatever pain you might try to inflict towards the triple gem, it's not going to do anything. So your coming to the defense of the triple gem with your mind of anger is ridiculous because there's no harm being caused to the triple gem. Let's go on then to the next part of this that is a little bit more in line with, again, the topic of practicing the patience that relies on the Dharma. This is the second outline. It is likewise suitable to be patient with harm to persons such as friends. So in this verse, it says, I should counteract anger towards those who harm my spiritual masters, my relatives, and so forth, and my friends, by seeing, as in the manner shown before when we looked at this second type of Dharma, that they arise from conditions. Remember that that was the whole gist of what we looked at in terms of that second type of patience, was that looking at the whole idea of things arising from causation, universal causality being kind of what's behind everything coming into existence, which of course is pointing to the fact of their emptiness. And that of course is how we normally talk about this patience, is in regard to our patience in practicing the teachings on emptiness and persevering in our inability to understand emptiness and to apply it properly. We just have to keep working on it. Well, here the idea is to understand that even when someone is attacking your friends, doing things that harm your friends, the people that are very dear to you, it's inappropriate to get angry at them because there are causes and conditions as to why that arose, just like there were causes and conditions as to why the harm to us arose. So here Gyaltsab Je says, it is likewise unsuitable to get angry when one's teacher, contemporaries, relatives, or friends and so forth are being harmed, or one sees them being harmed. One should stop anger by seeing that the friends and so forth are being harmed due to the karma accumulated through unsuitable actions in the past, that the harm had arisen through the earlier explained by way of conditions. So again, we tried to apply that understanding of all the various causes and conditions. The one that's being highlighted here, of course, is the idea of karma. Nothing happens even to friends or anyone in our lives without karma being an instrument in that. This is what we were trying to understand in regard to ourselves, and of course many other causes and conditions as to why that all occurred. It doesn't have any autonomy. It's not something we can say, oh, they're the only thing that's default in this whole equation is the person who's harming my friends, my teacher, my family members, and so on. There are other factors involved, and not the least of which is the karma of the beings who are experiencing that. Our dear friends and relatives have karma just like we do, and they are in that way a part of creating that experience of harm. And we're not trying to just wash our hands of it again. If anything, as was said in the previous verse, we have even greater compassion for everyone involved. Because here you have the people who are your friends, who are the victims in that case, the perpetrators, who are the people who are now inflicting harm on your friends. Getting angry at either one of these is not appropriate. These are the people who created it through being the perpetrators in the past, and now that person who was the victim in the past is the perpetrator. Well, they both keep going back and forth in these roles. So if anything, compassion is called for everyone, as well as, again, the patience that is definitely understanding the Dharma, understanding that things arise from causality, that nothing has that autonomy. Therefore, everything is empty of inherent existence and arises within the sphere of causality. So again, this is what we looked at previously in regard to that second type of patience. Now we go on to the third type of patience being applied in the case of friends. This is stopping it with the patience that does not think anything of harm. Well, here we are not the ones being harmed. I mean, we do get harmed when our friends get harmed. I'm not saying we don't experience some distress when people who are dear to us have to suffer with various things inflicted upon them by other people. But we need to apply the same logic here. It's the same type of patience that doesn't think anything of harm, that recognizes all of what we previously saw and applies it in a similar way. So here we have four outlines. We have first, being angry at that with mind alone is unsuitable. So this is very similar to what we saw in regard to the stick, where the person was beating you with the stick. And we said, why are you getting angry at the person and not the stick? And you're like, oh, because the stick was being wielded by the person. Well, then why aren't you angry at the anger or the hatred in the mind of that being? Because that they're being wielded by that causes them to pick up the stick and hit you. So verse 66 says, if embodied creatures are harmed by both those with mind and those without mind, why single out and begrudge only those with mind? Therefore, I should be patient with harm. So again, we're having different criteria. We're looking at those who have mind, and we're somehow holding them more accountable for the harm that they inflict as beings, as opposed to whatever it is that they use to cause that harm. But really, again, once more, the thing that we should be upset at is the anger or the delusions in the mind of that being that cause them to do that harm. So if we're going to get upset at others inflicting harm on our friends, well, first of all, look at it as, are you getting upset also at the stick that they used to hit your friend with, or whatever it is that they did to harm your friend? No, because you're only getting mad at the embodied things, or the mind that is embodied, not the mindless factors that are involved. So it's, again, just pointing out some inconsistencies in our logic and our thinking. At the top of page 26, Gyaltsab says, the embodied beings that are our relatives and so forth are harmed both by the enemy that has mind and the weapons and so forth that do not have mind. So why do I single out those with mind, take exception to them, and be aggressive towards them? This is unsuitable, and thus I should be patient with the harm of relatives. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't come to the aid of those people who are having harm inflicted upon them. The whole point is, what type of mindset are you doing that with? If you're doing it with anger, well, then you're again not going to be having a productive outcome to it. If you go in and try to resolve the situation with peaceful terms, with an ability to sit both people down and have them have some reconciliation in the whole process, that's very different. But to get angry at that person, go over there with a stick yourself and beat them senseless because they harmed your relative, again, the logic isn't quite consistent in terms of, once more, you haven't really looked at the deeper cause of why they did that. You haven't really gone to that length that we looked at earlier in regard to the person beating you with the stick, that it is actually their hatred that you should be angry at, or that you should be upset about. So do what you can to relieve that, to remove that out of the equation, because once that's gone, then the person isn't going to pick up a stick and beat somebody, because they don't have the mind that is controlling them, the mind of hatred or anger or what have you. So then we go on to the next outline, that is the reason why it is unsuitable to be angry. This is just a single verse as well. Let's look at that one. Should one person do harm out of confusion, and another is confused and gets angry, then who would be without fault and who would be at fault? So here it's an interesting verse because it's looking at it from the point of view of, okay, this person who is harming your relative is harming them out of confusion, not even knowing, what is right. They don't have any idea of the law of cause and effect. And of course, they're under the control of their deeper level of ignorance or confusion, clinging to themselves and phenomena as existing inherently and so on. And then you have yourself who's getting angry and upset at them causing harm to your relative. Well, if you're confused about the faults of anger, and you're also, of course, still together with the deeper level of ignorance or confusion that that person also is with, well, then who's at fault and who's without fault? We would both be kind of dealing with the same situation. We'd be getting angry out of our own confusion, where they got upset at our relative and hurt them out of their confusion. So let's look at what Gyaltsab Je says here. He says, some beings commit harm such as killing and so forth due to being ignorant of the law of cause and effect. Of course, this is when the ignorance is set out in terms of the mental factor of ignorance. There are usually two types that are highlighted, though of course we can have many levels of ignorance. But the two main ones are in ignorance of karma, the law of cause and effect, which is what causes most beings to engage in non-virtue, is because they don't know that what they are engaging in leads to their own suffering. And then the second type of ignorance, of course, is this deeper level of ignorance, that is the clinging to a self of persons as well as phenomena, that thinks that things exist inherently, intrinsically. And again, in this case, we both have that level of confusion, the one that's harming our relative as well as ourselves. But here it's looking at the coarser form of ignorance that's also operative. The fact that at that time, that person isn't even aware of the danger of their own actions. So, okay, so that's the other person. They're committing that harm to your relative out of that basis. And some become angry, meaning yourself, because of being ignorant of the faults of anger. We get upset at the person because we're blind at that time to what we are going to have to experience further down the road by getting angry and upset at that person causing harm to our friends. So in that case, out of those two, how can one say one who is without fault and one who is with fault? They're both equal. You're no different than that person if you go to that level of causing harm to them out of your own anger. Since both are equally with fault, it is unsuitable to return harm with anger. Let's go on then to the next outline as we continue to work with this idea of friends and relatives and so on. Here it does take a little twist in some regard because it starts talking about how this is one's own fault. But remember, we can apply this to the other person as well, as we did earlier in verse 66. So the first verse in this section, why did I previously commit those actions because of which others now cause harm? If all are related to my actions, why should I begrudge them? Of course, this is the standard teachings on karma, right? We can't blame and begrudge others if our own karma led to them doing what they're doing in some part. We're not denying that they did what they're doing or are doing what they're doing because of their own volition and actions and so on, but we're simply admitting that we are a part of the equation. So why should we blame the other person? Having seen this, no matter what, I should strive in this way for what is meritorious, that all will have loving thoughts towards each other, that it's much more beneficial for us to stay on the straight path, to practice virtue, to engage in merit, and not have thoughts of anger, but rather have thoughts of loving kindness and compassion towards others. So I'm going to go to the Gyaltsab Je for the first part of this commentary, and then I actually want to use Abbot Dakpa Gyaltsen's commentary that I put on a slide for the second part of this. So it says here on the middle of page 26, in the past, why did I create the karma due to which others harm me? And of course, we could say that as well for friends, relatives, whoever it is that we see experiencing this harm. If all the meaningless harms that I receive depend on my bad karma, then why do I take exception to the other person? Why do I get angry with the other person? If once more, I am the one at fault. And of course, if we have that understanding with regard to others, as we saw in verse 66, it is their karma that is causing them to be harmed in that moment. My anger at that person or at the situation it's not really seeing things logically, consistently, in a way that actually makes sense. In terms of the second verse and the commentary on that, let's go back to the slides. As I said, I want to use what Abbot Dakpa Gyaltsen says here. It says, having seen thus that all harms and sufferings arise from karma, No matter what, I should strive in this way for what is meritorious, such as compassion, thinking, if only there will be a time when all sentient beings have loving thoughts towards each other, I shall make it so. I just like the power of the words there a little bit more than what was in Gyaltsab Je's commentary. But this is the Bodhisattva attitude, right? Whenever we see harm in the world, we only want to hold the thoughts of, we want to be the source of and the example of practicing loving kindness and compassion in the world, because that's what we want all beings to have towards each other. Even our dear friends that are being harmed, we want them to have that as well as the person doing the harm to them. So let's go on then to the last outline of this, contemplating the benefits of patience. We've seen touching on the benefits of patience way back at the beginning, and we're going to see it at the end of this chapter. Here it's looking at the benefits of patience in terms of, why it's important that we need to be patient with what's going on, and especially when we see suffering in others as well as ourselves, the distress we might have and so on, that we will get great benefit from that. This is divided into 3 parts. The first one is striving not to degenerate one's virtue. There's 2 verses for this. For example, if a fire in one house has moved into another house, it is right to remove and get rid of straw and such things that the fire will spread to, right? This makes sense. It's a great example for what happens in terms of the mind of anger being like that fire. We even use that in the title of this course, right? Extinguishing the flames of anger. Anger is like a fire, and what is it fed by? The kindling, the fuel that we can give it in terms of the mind states that we bring to that situation. That's what's explained in verse 71. Likewise, when my mind is attached to something, especially to the people that I love and care about, and the fire of hatred spreads, I should immediately get rid of it for fear of my merit being burned. In other words, get rid of our strong attachment. Again, this isn't telling you don't have the love and compassion for your friends when they are being harmed by someone else. It's saying, look at how your attachment is what mucks it all up. Remember how a lot of people, Venerable Rabbeinu is very keen on doing this, and it really is so true. Where does anger come from? Anger comes from attachment not getting what it wants. Well, when we have attachment to the well-being of our friends and loved ones, right? We have that with regard to ourselves. We already looked at that. Here we're in this next section where we're looking at, I'm attached to my friends having everything go well for them. I get distressed if I hear, that my partner or someone that I'm very close to, that they've gotten lambasted by somebody, or someone has harmed them or stolen from them or done various things to them. I don't want them to experience harm, but that's a form of attachment to some degree. Together with my love for them, obviously, I don't want them to suffer. I want them to be happy. I want them to have, peaceful mind and not be upset and disturbed by others. But why do I get so upset at that person who caused that? Because I'm attached to my friend and my dear one. Attachment, once more, is the highlighting of that person and elevating them up because they do good things for me. Attachment is I-centered. It means that I want to take care of that person because they take care of me. It's not genuinely focused on the other person. Loving kindness is, but with loving kindness, I would have equal loving kindness for the person that inflicted that harm on my dear friend or relative, because they both are worthy of that thought of wanting them to be happy, wanting them to not suffer. So these 2 verses are pointing out that just with the analogy of if a fire is raging from one house to the next, well then why would I continue to feed the fuel, give more fuel to that fire by having greater and greater attachment, and that attachment manifesting in my hatred towards the person who inflicted harm on my friends? Again, it's all related. Attachment is definitely feeding into the response of anger. That reaction of wanting to get upset at the person who harmed that person who's very dear to me. So let's look at what Gyaltsab Je says at the top of page 27. He says, for example, if a house is on fire and the fire has moved to another house where it spreads to the grass and the wood, then it is suitable that one sacrifices the hay and wood in order to save the wealth of the house, in order to not let the whole thing be consumed. It would be unsuitable to have attachment to them. We'll let go of those things that have to be burned in order for, or have to be kind of removed in order for the whole thing to be saved. We're not going to hold on to it with such strong attachment. Similarly, if the fire of hatred is spreading due to the condition of attachment for friends and so forth, and there is the doubt that the wealth of merits and so forth will burn, that I'm going to lose all of my merits by getting angry at the other person who's harming my friend because of my attachment to them, then the basis for one's attachment is suitable to be given up without doubt, and it is unsuitable to be attached. So again, it's wise of us to let go of our attachment. Don't lose your love and your compassion for that being, but have equal love and compassion for the person that harmed them, that caused them to experience that. That would be the more appropriate response. But to have the reaction of getting angry and upset and doing what you can to retaliate against that person because they harmed the person you're attached to, you're going to let your attachment burn up all of your merit for the sake of doing harm to that being who inflicted harm on the person you're attached to. If you let go of your attachment at that time and actually don't generate that mind of anger, that is the response to attachment not getting what it wants, not having your friends and dear ones be okay and not harmed, well then again, you're going to cause problems to yourself, and you're going to harm the other person, and you're going to have all the karmic consequences of that, and so on. But this is highlighting that point that, attachment is sort of what's the underwriting thing that gets us in trouble. Attachment to our friends. Again, this is one reason why we practice equanimity, right? To let go of the attachment to friends, the aversion towards enemies, and the indifference towards strangers. We continue with this section, purifying the causes for hell by tolerating small sufferings. So again, we're looking at, this is actually where one author, the Sazang Mati Panchen Sakya Lama, has these as the third type of patience being applied here, because we do start talking about how we endure various levels of suffering with a mind of patience. First, we're being given an example, and then we're going to look at the meaning of the example. Verse 72 shows us this whole example that's related to purifying the causes of hell by tolerating a small amount of suffering. The example is it not excellent if a man condemned to death is released after having just his hand cut off? If somebody's on death row and they say, we decided to forego taking your life, but you're going to have to lose one of your hands. Would be probably delighted, right? Because he gets to live the rest of his life, albeit with one hand off. As horrible, miserable as that is, he still would rather have just one hand missing than lose his whole life. Is it not excellent if I am spared from hell by way of human suffering? So here, Gyaltsab J says, actually, we're going to go to Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen. I think this is actually in your handout as well. The opinion is put forward here. If I am separated from my friends and relatives, then I will experience suffering. This is the kind of that whole idea that we just talked about in terms of our attachment to friends and so on. Say that we do have an instance where somebody harms our friend, and we don't go retaliate for that person or towards the person who harmed them. We don't say, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. Give me their address and I'll go get them, make sure they have to pay for this. Well, if we don't do that and our friends, actually say, well, sorry, I don't really want you as my friend anymore. You didn't come to my defense. If we actually lose people in our lives through these actions, or somehow that relationship is ruined because we didn't show equal, anger towards that person that harmed them, and we didn't go and want to get back at them and retaliate, well then better that we lose our friends than we lose all of our merit. Again, friends and so on are transitory. It's not to say that we shouldn't cherish those relationships, take care of those people. They are someone we have good karma with, but don't do that at the cost of losing your merit, losing everything that you've acquired through this life and through your practice of patience. So the opinions being put forward, if I'm separated from my friends and relatives by virtue of all that, then I'm going to have to experience some suffering. Well, obviously, but the response is it not excellent if a man condemned to death is released after having just his hand cut off? It is excellent. Likewise, is it not excellent if I am spared the sufferings of hell by way of merely human suffering, hunger, and thirst? If somehow I only have to experience some smaller suffering rather than a larger suffering, isn't that better? It is appropriate to avert great suffering by willingly accepting small ones. So again, we don't always know the consequences of our actions, but the point is why develop a mind of anger that could lead to even greater sufferings and a consuming of our merit and so on, when better to let go of that. mean, I don't know. I've never been in a situation where, at least that I can recall, where someone's asked me to help them, take vengeance on somebody who harmed them. I mean, that would be a horrible thing to get caught up in. But I can imagine a situation where if you felt that someone wasn't willing to do that for you, that you would question the friendship of that person. So we could see how others could have situations where, because we don't come to their aid in that way and have equal anger towards the perpetrator that harmed them, that they don't want anything to do with us. They almost feel like we're taking the side of the perpetrator. And I have had that case where I've tried to refrain from getting angry at somebody who was harming someone else and fuel that type of anger, and the other person said, what, are you on their side? And I'm like, no, I'm not on. I want the whole thing to be resolved. I don't want either party to get angry or upset. But anyway, the point is that we may lose people in the process of this. Better to lose people and experience some small suffering perhaps from whatever negativities we might engage in, versus consuming all of our merit, consuming all of that and engaging in even more harmful actions towards others that cause us to have to go to a hell realm rather than just have some small suffering. So again, this is the commentary for 72. It continues and quotes from Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo. Contemplate the benefit of dispelling immeasurable suffering as follows. Reflect well on the differences between short-term and long-term suffering, thinking a man who is to be executed is overjoyed when he is freed from execution after having merely his fingers cut off. Likewise, how excellent it would be if similarly, by means of this slight suffering of human hardship, I could permanently dispel the sufferings of endless psychic existence in general, and in particular the suffering of the bad migrations, such as the hells. If you do this well, you will produce the courage of fearlessness with respect to hardships. So again, this section is all about people inflicting harm on our friends, but we can use the same logic with regard to ourselves, right? Somebody's getting angry and upset at you and doing something to harm you. Why not endure that suffering, that harm, rather than inflicting harm upon them that causes you to experience even greater harm? It just doesn't make sense for us to do that. We're trading a small harm that we have to experience now. We're retaliating against the person to kind of have that come to an end, or to maybe you can't even get it to end. They've inflicted harm on you. You still have to deal with that harm, but you want to retaliate against them. You're going to cause yourself even greater suffering in the future. This doesn't make sense. It's not logical in Buddhist terms in relation to karma. Then we have the meaning that is being set out in this verse 73. If I cannot endure even just this suffering of the present, then why do I not refrain from getting angry, the cause of suffering in hell? Of course, this is the truth of it too, right? That we also are blind to the fact that if we're having such a strong reaction of anger because of what we have to endure in the moment, or what we have to see our friends endure in the moment, then why don't we refrain from getting angry? Because it's going to only cause us bigger suffering down the road. So let's look at what Abbot Dogpa Gyaltsen says about this. The opinion is put forward, but I cannot even endure just this suffering of the present. So in the previous one, we saw that the person was saying, well, you should be okay with kind of being with that suffering because you may be enduring this suffering so you don't have to have a greater one. But somebody's saying, I can't even really endure just this suffering of the present. The response is, if you cannot even endure just the suffering of the present, such as hunger and thirst, and being slightly pierced by weapons, I don't know what slightly pierced by weapons is, but then thus, why do you not make effort at refraining from getting angry, which is the cause of even greater suffering, the suffering in a hell realm? It's kind of throwing back that same logic that we are kind of taking the suffering we're experiencing now, which is a small suffering, and we're not willing to deal with that in a constructive way and be patient and develop greater skill with it. Instead, we're getting angry. That's going to cause even greater suffering in the future. It just doesn't make sense. Why would we do that? If the whole point of it was we don't want to experience suffering, or we don't want to see our loved ones experience suffering, well then why would we, get angry in the moment? Why would we do that? Because we're only going to cause further pain and suffering down the road, in even greater suffering. So now we go on, or there's actually another quote from the Lamrim Chenmo, I forgot. So here Lama Tsongkhapa says, you will see that anger is inappropriate when you examine the subject. It is contradictory if you get angry with a harmer due to not bearing the suffering, because by bearing the slight suffering in the present, you are eagerly creating the cause of boundless suffering in the bad migrations. So if we're not able to be tolerant and bear the suffering in the moment, we're only going to create the causes for greater suffering in the future. Therefore, induce a sense of embarrassment, thinking, I am very stupid, and make effort not to lose your temper. It's kind of Lama Tsongkhapa is being a little harsh here, but we kind of look at it and go, we're not being wise. We're not being the wisest that we can be. We aren't actually making the correct choice. Now we look at the last part of this section. It is suitable to like the austerities for the great purpose. This is similar to that verse that I shared from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, that quote, that we should engage in the suffering that leads to happiness rather than engaging in the happiness that only leads to more suffering. Here we have two parts to this: having regret due to not having achieved the purpose of self or others, despite all the bodies we've already taken. And then we'll go on to the next part. Verse 74 says, for the sake of my desires, I experienced thousands of eons in hell, but I enacted the purpose of neither others nor myself. Like if we were to, look at all the rebirths that we've had since beginningless time, and all of what we engaged in that was solely just to avoid suffering and to have happiness in that life, and all the suffering we had to experience on the basis of that, all the rebirths in hell realms and unfortunate states that occurred because of that misguided action, well, then all of our suffering was pointless. At times when we had to experience suffering and we got angry at others, we created the negative karma that led us to have those unfortunate states. So it was pointless. We went through that suffering and all we got was greater suffering out of it. What a waste. And we should have some regret at that. We should look at that and say, I don't want to keep doing that. Thank you very much. That's not a healthy response to other suffering, my own suffering, whatever is going on. Gyaltsab Je says at the top of page 28, because before I was engaged in negative actions due to desire for the mistaken object of my craving, I have experienced for thousands of eons the sufferings of being cut and so forth in hell. Despite this, I have not achieved the purpose of self or others. I haven't been able to liberate myself from suffering. I haven't been able to get enlightened and help others. I haven't done anything constructive with all that suffering I've had to endure. It was only the product of my own bad choices. Then we look at the whole idea of it being suitable. The next outline is suitable to be happy because of achieving the purpose of all sentient beings by being patient with the present austerities. That actually, once more, we should be joyful when we have to endure suffering, or even when we see others are suffering, that we see it's an opportunity for us to not create the causes for further suffering for ourselves, but rather to create the causes for happiness for both ourselves and others. Verse 75 says, but now, since great purpose will be established from harm which is not as much, I should be solely joyful towards such suffering that dispels the harms of migrating beings. So actually our suffering can be very fruitful, because actually if we look at suffering as an opportunity to practice patience, even when it is the suffering of another person that we're dear to, and rather than getting angry and upset at the person who inflicted harm on them or who's inflicting harm on you, you can use that in a beneficial way that will actually help you to achieve the benefit for yourself and for others. Here, Gyaltsab Je says, the austerity at the time of achieving the purpose of others does not harm me that much, but in dependence on it, I achieve great purpose. I can use that suffering that I'm experiencing, that distress, that upset, in a very fruitful way. Therefore, it is suitable to be only happy and accept the sufferings of the austerities that clear away all the harm of migrators. That's why Rinpoche again said we should engage in the suffering that leads to happiness, the things we have to endure, the things of our existence that are part and parcel of being a human being in this world. We endure those with a happy mind, with a mind that isn't disturbed and upset and angry and so on. So we can get great benefit from it. We should actually even rejoice. So these last two verses are kind of about, we should regret the way that we haven't used our suffering fruitfully in the past, and we should rejoice that now we have the opportunity to use it to great benefit. So let me keep going a little bit. I know it's about 1:45, and I want to try to end in about 10 minutes to give you a little bit of time at least for a question or two. But I want to get a little bit further. So now we go on to the third part. Remember how there were those 9 bases. Now we go to the people who are helping, benefiting your enemies. So you want normally, I mean, this is the fault that we have. You normally want to see our enemies suffer, right? We don't really want things to happen good to them. And some people will, unfortunately for us, come to the aid of our benefit, or aid of our enemies and benefit them. Well, we should even be patient in regard to those who do that for our enemies. There are three outlines to this. The first one is abandoning intolerance to the achievement of praise and renown by enemies, the praise and good reputation that your enemies might receive from others. This has two parts. Page 31 of Gyaltsab Je is where we're at on these. The first one is, since it is the cause for one's happiness, it is suitable to want it. That we could actually be happy at the times when our enemy is praised. Sounds strange, but let's look at what Shantideva says. He says in verse 76, should others find joyous happiness by praising someone having excellent qualities? So this is the case where your enemy does have these excellent qualities. The person you don't like, the political figure that you can't stand, has actually some good qualities, and someone is finding, joy in those, is kind of highlighting those and rejoicing in them. Why, mind, do you not praise that person too and be joyful? That joyous happiness of yours is a source of joy without misdeed, permitted by those having excellent qualities, and is also a supreme means for gathering others. So various benefits are pointed out in terms of generating that mind that rejoices in the good qualities of others, even our enemies. It can be a source of joy for us without any misdeed. We don't have to engage in any misbehavior. We just rejoice in their qualities. It's permitted by the Buddhas. It's actually encouraged by the Buddhas. And it's a supreme means for highlighting, others, bringing others into our sphere of good influence, because when they see us praising the qualities of others, they actually have greater faith and confidence in us, because we are actually not pointing out the faults of others, we're pointing out their good qualities. So let's look at what Gyaltsab Je says on this. He says, if others praise an enemy of mine, saying he or she has qualities, then the person praising also gains happiness, right? If you're praising the qualities of others, you do that because it brings you some joy. You like to say to somebody, oh, you have such, good patience. You're such a patient person with that, with your child or with whatever's going on. Well, that brings you joy to highlight that good quality in another and bring that out. In that case, why do you not like the other person that has praised the enemy? Why are you upset and angry at someone who's praising the enemy if they're actually doing that and bringing about great mental joy and happiness by rejoicing in the qualities of your enemy? If you do, then the happiness of the joy of liking others' qualities will become the unflawed source of future happiness. If you actually rejoice in their good qualities as well, then you will win as well. It's a win-win situation. They win because they've rejoiced in the qualities of your enemy. You win because you've rejoiced in the qualities of your enemy. And moreover, you haven't gotten angry and upset at the person who is rejoicing in those good qualities of your enemy. If they do indeed have those qualities, Geshe Jumpa Tekchok in his oral commentary emphasized, if the person doesn't have those qualities, and maybe it's another situation. If somebody's praising the qualities of a political leader that aren't really there, that aren't evident, like if they were a person, I won't say who has shown to not be very truthful in the things that they say, and someone were to praise them saying they're the most honest president since George Washington, who could not tell a lie. Well, then, we might take exception to that. Don't get angry at the person, just understand that they're saying a comment out of their own ignorance, but they're not really acknowledging the qualities in that person. But if that person sees good qualities that are also evident to us, why shouldn't we rejoice in those? Those are the source of great happiness. In verse 77, he says, that will become the source of, again, your own future happiness. This was taught by those with qualities, the conquerors and their children, and praised by them as such. It is also the best way for attracting disciples, for attracting people to us. Why would we want to be angry and upset at that? Will be much better thought of if we actually do highlight the qualities of another. If we actually say, yes, it's true, he or she does have those qualities. Let's go on to the next outline. It being the cause for others' happiness, not wanting, is unsuitable. This has two outlines within it. If one does not wish others to have happiness, then one's happiness degenerates. So this is kind of what happens. This is why rejoicing is such an important practice. And it is a good antidote to a lot of the jealous thoughts, thoughts that get in the way of our mind of patience that create anger. Verse 78 says, "Furthermore, it is said that others will be happy in this way. If you do not want this happiness, then you should stop giving wages and the like. Thus you would be adversely affected both in this and future life." Future lives. Here the idea is that if you're really opposed to others being happy in this way, if you get really upset at that person who is praising your enemy and they do it, it brings them joy to praise their enemy in terms of their qualities. Well, if you don't want their happiness, then you apparently don't want anybody's happiness. So then stop giving wages to the people who work for you, the people who take care of you. Stop taking care of them because you don't want them to be happy equally. I mean, you're not wanting happiness should be applied across the board. Once more, it's showing inconsistencies. And if you do that, you stop giving wages and taking care of the people who are taking care of you, you're going to be adversely affected, both in this life and future lives, because you will experience the deterioration of the care for you in this life, plus you will have to experience the faults of your not rejoicing in the future. Your mind that, is not going to be happy at others' good qualities and so on. So here, Gyaltsab Je towards the bottom of 31 says, "Further, by also praising, the object of the praise becomes happy. So even your own enemy becomes happy." When it's not just the person who praises them that is happy, even the person who is your enemy in that case becomes happy at having their qualities praised, right? But if you do not wish them to have that happiness or anyone else to have that happiness, then since the wages you pay your servants makes them happy too, you should stop offering. By stopping this and other things, and in this life the servants will not work, and in a later life one will not have happiness. In such a way, one's happiness degenerates in this observed life and in the unobserved future life. So if we're envious of others' happiness, whether it be the person who's pointing out the qualities of our enemy or the enemy who gets happy at having their qualities pointed out, if we're going to object to anybody's happiness that is arising in a good way. I mean, again, we're not talking about when somebody's qualities are praised that they don't have, where they start getting an inflated mind and they become prideful on the basis of thinking that they've got qualities that they don't possess. We're not talking about something that is dishonest. We're talking about an honest admission to the qualities of another, pointing out the qualities of another and praising them. If your enemy is the person who has those qualities and they get happy at that and you are miserable at their happiness, well, then you might as well get rid of everyone's happiness. I mean, why pay attention to the people who care for you then either? Once more, it's inconsistent. Why? Because we care for the ones who take care of us, our servants and people, workers or whatever it is that are involved in our welfare, because they take care of us. But when it's somebody else that's involved, we don't really care. So again, it's just showing that our logic should be across the board more consistent. Let's go on to the final verse in this section. "Hence it is appropriate to wish others happiness." The verse here is, "When people describe my own good qualities, I want others to be happy too. But when they describe the good qualities of others, I do not even wish them to be happy." Now, this is an interesting thing. I don't really know the Tibetan well enough to go back to the source and tell what's what, but this was the only one that translated it this way. Ziggy To, who did our verse translation, said, it says there, "I do not even wish them to be happy," when others are describing the good qualities of others. Stephen Batcher's translation and most of the other ones had the concept that I do not wish to be happy myself. But anyway, let's look at the commentary from Gyaltsab Je, which is in line with that second translation. The commentary from Gyaltsab Je is at the top of page 32. He says, "When someone else expresses my qualities, I then wish that person to have happiness. And when this says I express the qualities of others, when someone expresses the qualities of others, I do not even wish myself to have happiness." So if it's someone expressing your qualities, well then you can wish that other person to be happy, right? Once more, it's self-focused. I get really happy when someone expresses my good qualities, but then I don't even get happy if someone expresses the qualities of others. This is unsuitable and contradictory. In the same way one wishes others to be happy through one's praise, the other person praising also wishes to be happy. So in other words, if anyone is about just trying to simply be happy in their praise of others, whether they're praising us or praising another person, we should support it. We should be happy that they're happy, not get upset that they're happy. Again, this isn't about, misguided happiness or happiness that is dishonest. Abbot Dr. Gelson's commentary, and this is where I think Ziggy got this from, where she said, I do not even wish them to be happy, is because Abbot Dr. Gelson interpreted it this way. When people describe my own good qualities, I want others, those who praise me, to have mental happiness too. But I do not wish even those who describe the good qualities of others to be happy. I don't care about the happiness of others when they're praising others. I only care about their happiness when they're praising me. That's the gist of the way he interpreted it. This is inappropriate and contradictory, whereby just as I wish others joy due to I myself being praised, likewise I should be joyful due to others being praised. So this was kind of interesting. The last part of it seems to go to the way that Stephen Batchelor translated it, that you're talking about whether you should be happy or not when others are being praised, versus obviously you want others to be happy when they're praising you, but should you want others to be happy when they're praising others? Or should you want to be happy when others are being praised? It's all the same thing in some way. Happiness is the cause of good karma, is the cause of good benefit. I know I said I was going to stop there. Let's just go on to one more verse that will, well, actually, we can leave this. Let's leave here because we've only got a few minutes left. All right, so that was the idea behind these. Is we're still in this section around benefiting one's enemies, and the whole point that was being made here. I know these are kind of very selective things that are being looked at, but the whole idea that we do get upset when our enemies are praised, when people say good things about our enemies. Well, if those are honestly good things that are being said, we should rejoice in that. We should be happy that other people are capable of seeing good qualities and acknowledging them, professing them, just in the same way that we get happy when other people point out our good qualities. Okay, are there any questions or comments? I didn't see anything pop up in the chat box the whole time, so I'm not sure if anyone has anything to say. Any hands up or? Okay. All right. Well, then let's go ahead and dedicate, if that was all, because I think, again, I don't know that there's much time left to go into any more of the text. We've got 3 more classes, again, the 3 remaining Mondays in August, and I'm still pretty confident we're going to make it through it. So hang in there. We're already up through 80. We've got 54 verses to make it through, but it's not so bad. So I'm pretty sure we'll get there. So let's go ahead and do the verses of dedication. Let me go forward here to the 2 verses that we do at the end of teachings. The first one is where we dedicate all this positive potential that we've created to our own attainment of enlightenment. And in that state of being a Guru Buddha, someone who then can lead all others to enlightenment, we will be able to do that perfectly. So we're dedicating our merit for the welfare of all through our own becoming a Buddha. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then this verse that encapsulates the power of bodhicitta and how important it is that we hold this mind very dear and continue to cultivate it and grow it, but also that it grow and cultivate in the hearts of all beings, especially the leaders of the world at this time. I mean, think of what a different world we would be living in if all of our leaders had bodhicitta, had this desire to be of great benefit to others and dedicate their lives compassionately in that way. So make that strong aspiration for ourselves and all beings to develop and grow bodhicitta. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then the prayers for the long lives of our teachers begin with His Holiness and then Lama Zopa. As we recite these, I think we're creating the causes for the good health and long lives of all spiritual guides in this world and in all realms of existence. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And finally, dedicate for those that you're holding in your heart right now, all beings who are experiencing suffering due to obstacles, due to illness, those who have died or are dying, all those that we know, as well as those whose situation moves us at this time. May they be free of these forms of suffering and find all the causes that will lead them to perfect peace and happiness. And may all beings find true peace and happiness through what we've done here tonight. Okay, thank you all very much. And so I will, as usual, have a set of some review questions for what we went through tonight, as well as a meditation on some select parts of what we covered for you to work with. I hope the meditations have been useful. They're mostly meditating on the verses, and I think it's really important that we use those verses as meditation, because that's what they're intended for, is really to help us to put these into practice in our own minds by reflecting on the meaning of these verses. So anyway, I will have all that to Jennifer tomorrow so she can post it on the website and you can have access to it then. So thank you all for participating and for your patience with me. And I will look forward to next week as well. Okay, stay safe,
Thank
stay
you.
healthy.
Thank
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you,